like how do you want to represent yourselves and this sort of group within the larger context of architectural discourse, and what is changing through the work that not only us are doing, but increasingly more people obvious, which is great, right? I mean, you probably noticed that in the last 6 months or so, there's literally been an explosion of people doing AI, whatever that means. Yeah. And like, is it interesting to have a critical mass that is actually really pushing for neural network applications in architecture? And one of the questions that I asked last time, pretty much at the end, about the benefit of artificial intelligence to architecture, or basically what I'm really interested into is how does it really change the conversation of architecture? Does it change it at all, right? In the first place, there seems to be certain architectural traditions that are still present within neural network applications. I mean, the discussions about folding three-dimensional space into a two-dimensional surface with the use of pixels, interpolating imagery that results in interesting new outcomes. Daniel Bolojan pointed out once or twice in different other conversations, something that I also completely agree with, and I think it's super interesting, is the difference between interpolation, where machines are really good in doing that, extrapolation, which we as humans are actually quite good in doing, and machines not that much, yeah. Which I think is the majority of the work we're doing at the moment, by the way, is extrapolating from imagery that is generated through neural networks and understanding that as a possibility for architectural applications. And the third one being invention. And invention being the hardest category, because invention means something really entirely new. And occasionally we as humans might even miss the agencies to understand something new. So we might dismiss it because we don't understand it as something new. Basically, I read recently a really interesting article about the human brain primarily operating as a giant remixer. So we have knowledge that we acquire through our life. And sometimes when we think we invented something new, it's basically just putting those things back together in a different way. And that creates a novelty. But in fact, it's not a real innovation. The invention, like real invention, is really hard to achieve. So I don't know, this gives you a little bit of background. I don't know what you think. Let me know what you think about that.
Well, you kind of mentioned maybe we don't want to talk too much about creativity, but in a way it's in some sense inevitable, even to frame it as interpolation, extrapolation, or invention. Yeah. I mean, even the thing they talk about is personal creativity, right? Which is the key creativity according to Margaret Coulton.
Yeah. The problem with creativity, in my opinion, especially in the frame of AI, is that the more I read about examples and things I've seen so far, the more I'm convinced that what we interpret as creativity is nothing but our interpretation as humans of something that provokes our mind to think that it could be creative. So the creativity is not in not in the neural network. The creativity ultimately is with us interpreting the result of that neural network. Yeah,
it's basically our projection.
Exactly. So this is
onto the artifact. Yeah.
That I think that goes into that aspect of extrapolation that I mentioned before. We extrapolate from that visual stimuli something that informs our project further, but it doesn't mean that that result was intended by the neural network, right? Oh, I disappeared. Cool. So this is I mean, the whole creativity conversation in AI is a very, I think has to be tackled with care. I think it's a little bit, people are, it's too much in this area, like, ooh, AIs are gonna take over the world because they're super intelligent, and you know, this, which is not the reality as far as I understand it. Yeah. And there goes so much work into selecting particular data sets, selecting the specific neural network that you apply, changing the code to get it to work in a specific direction, playing around with the weights. Like, all of these are influences that we have humans put on top of a neural network, right? So it's not doing a lot on its own. In fact, it's an algorithm that can do particular things, that can learn features, that can, interpolate between imagery, that can extract information out of big data. But at the end of the day, if it's really creative or really intelligent, for that matter, it's a completely different story.
I think this is definitely true. Why do we care? I feel like that. I feel like, of course, it's not creative. It's a neural net. Like, if it was, I feel like this is a branding issue. Like, if it wasn't called AI, if it was called, data analysis, data diving or something like that, then this wouldn't be a question. We would look at it in a, we wouldn't expect any other new software tool to become creative on its own and look at it and say, oh no, it's not being creative. It's just us being creative with its output, of course. So I think it's good to get the conversation past, like, is the thing itself intelligent? Is the thing itself designing? Is the thing itself creative? I don't think it's doing any of those things.
Immanuel, you wanted to say something. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Well, actually, I was thinking, just going back to your original kind of framework about this idea of interpolation, extrapolation, invention, and then this kind of hijacking from Daniel, and how we could actually bring them together. So in the sense, extrapolating the role of the architect with these neural networks, how is it in fact possible, or in fact is reinforcing this world maker, as what Daniel was alluding to just now?
The design process itself is profoundly messy. I mean, if you think about it, it's sort of like an inverted entropic system. You start with chaos and you try to get it ordered somehow in a way that you can organize it into a building. Yeah. And maybe this would be a good point to ask one of the questions that I had for today's panel discussion, which is a more architectural question. Not so much about specific networks or techniques, but rather what the impact is of what we're currently seeing really to architecture design. And I would like to give the example of how basically modernism emerged at the same time, like also a variety of different typologies of architecture. So they actually could cater to specific things that emerged through their own time, whether this is factory halls or the office building. These were all things that basically emerged throughout the modern time as types that were catered to by architecture then, who also defined themselves or identified themselves as modern. Now, if you look into contemporary examples where types are emerging that are tied to also this sort of idea of architecture that we're trying to discuss here, you have things like data centers, you have things like Bitcoin mines, you have things like distribution centers that are all part of that environment of data, basically, that we're also dealing with in terms of our own design efforts. Yeah. And my question is whether we as architects should actually pick up these typologies and make it part of our identity as architects who are dealing with a field that has to do so much with data. Yeah. I think it's an interesting problem that we have not really tackled, but I would like to discuss this in this round.
Yeah, I think like when you especially say data centers or the distribution centers, I don't think that they're yet in really like a typology which is derived from handling data or working with data. What data, one of the capabilities is that you can quite stochastic or probabilistic actually understand actual environment, and data centers or distribution centers are prime examples for actually verticalizations and actually centralization. I would say it's more like a kind of leftover extreme version of the digital area, which was about optimization processes. And you have these same topologies actually emerged more in the post-war area or during post-war. Still, the largest distribution center is the K12 built for the Manhattan Project with 2 kilometers something length. So actually these kind of centers, I think they're one an older example of an older time. That really still has to show how really how the built environment, how it gets structured by really handling it as data.
Let's assume a specific case, like for example, some of the cases I mentioned are rather for environments for machines more than they are environments for humans. Like a Bitcoin mine is basically tons of racks with computers that are basically just doing their work there. But on the other hand, we have things like distribution centers, like Amazon distribution centers. How do you design in the context of what we are using as design tool? For example, an Amazon distribution center where humans would like to work, but at the same time caters to the necessities of big data. What I'm trying to go here with is, do the design tools that we're using change architecture design? And maybe I'm focusing on something that is too specific. Maybe I should say, does it change housing? Does it change offices? Yeah. Does it change a garden? Does it change a one-family housing project? Or is it purely aesthetical?
I find myself wondering if, and I feel like I would benefit from the point of view of a historian here. Not to, maybe you guys have more expertise in this than I do. Is it true that so you framed the question as by looking at a previous alliance between, let's say, between the kind of aesthetics of the modern movement and a series of types that were associated with that, or either that was related somehow to those aesthetics. Is such a relationship necessary? And is it necessarily driven by one or the other? Like, did the factory type demand modern aesthetics, or did the modern aesthetics demand the factory type, or was it an alliance of convenience? Did these two things just happen to arise in relationship to each other? Here we have new aesthetics, and here we have new types. So let's put them together. They happen to arise at the same moment, right? I'm not sure if there is a necessary connection there. Like, do we derive our machine aesthetics through I'm sure there's new typologies, there always are new typologies, but is there a necessary connection there is my question.
I think it would be too linear, and like also it would be more a discussion about style. Yeah? I mean, modernism was clear that when you say, hey, we have the industrial buildings, and from this kind of building type, you derive from the modernism. And there's this little book from Rainer Benham showed this in the Concrete Atlantis, where he shows actually that the first published images by Courvoisier or so, that makes actually this photo montage where he cuts off actually the ornamentation from those first ornamental buildings. Right. So there's in a way you would today say, or today, the extrapolation in a way of some in a way artifacts and that in a way like from this you derive something, and then this also leads to new types. So like you map this into different forms of programs and different forms of speculation. So I wouldn't see this in a form of a linear process. The same as history is also never a linear process.
I would also agree. I think there were no new really typologies developed in modernism in this time period, but it was more like they were the brainchild of the industrialization. So I think all of new typologies that were developed around the Enlightenment period. So I think in that sense, modernism definitely was an answer to the problems that were produced during this time. But during this time, I don't think they were really corresponding with the style, but it was really like a reaction to what was happening after that. And so far, I don't see that computation. I don't want to start here. I think we can switch like 60 years back now almost, and there is no really an architectural expression for what is happening within how it has affected urbanism, how it has affected all our infrastructures, how it has affected every piece of building street networks that we are doing. So it's not represented yet. And I think that's a big chance now, of course, to use that we are forced to think about what design is, as Daniel mentioned, and I totally agree with him. You really have to, you cannot not think about how to design, when you have to talk to a machine rather than to students who have a common sense of how you how you are being in the world. The machine does not, so you have to build the world, and I think that's for me the thing that really changes a lot.
Does computation as a social phenomena require an architectural expression? Like, does computate, like, does anyone care? Like, is it needed? I mean, we might want it as architects, but is it needed?
I think you have to ask the people who are traveling some places. There are the Chinese young people that are trying to get out of their countries and I think also the pandemic has taught us quite something, that we need an environment, we need to meet people, we need to be social. But our reaction time is just too slow in architecture. And it's not only the fault of architects, it's also the fault of the highly priced things that we are creating. That's not a cheap design. Like, you can have a new wallpaper in your home. So what the people are doing, they're starting to decorate more. They're starting to decorate their phones. They start to decorate their homes. They need a lot of stuff, because there's no really architecture. So they need a lot of objects that are surrounding them. And then obviously they always also need some sort of history. They want these patina. This always. Now, when we see all these hipster environments with these how do you say artificially aged
fake patina
and all the things. So yeah. So that's something that those people really need. So I wouldn't say computation has helped us to get rid of things. So on the contrary, so it seems we have a lot of people that are in need of better environments. And I mean, architecture is a huge waste producer alone. From that standpoint alone, I think gives you always a chance if you build up from scratch to do it right, So, but the problem is that we as architects are always too slow. The engineers are always faster, and they think they can do things without asking experts, So they are sometimes they think, okay, I'm an engineer, I can build a house, and so the architect is the last person to be enrolled in this environment. They are already the engineers are already for a couple of years employing the same tools we do, and they are maximizing and speeding up and whatnot. But they're not discussing quality as we do as architects, because that's actually what we stand for. So my question to you would be: so what are our standards?
But I think as architects, I have a feeling that we are also like a bit stuck into a very old model, and probably also when computation comes into play, we still have this kind of idea of, as an architect, I'm going to take a project, I'm going to design it, and here you go, I'm going to have a result, And I think that's I don't see it necessarily as a good model for in combination with AI and other technologies. And I think also this discussion with data centers and so on, those are just a result or an artifact, let's say, of the chip industry in a way. just because those are the types of technologies that we have. That's why we need those kind of huge boxes for data centers to put everything together. Yeah, but it has to do with technology. It doesn't have to do anything with this, the way that we design or something. And I think also we have to think as architects about this aspect of, you always have progress when there is convergence of technologies. Yeah. So right now, which is the very plausible convergence of technologies that we are dealing with these days. So if we are looking at big data, sensors, and so on, those kind of types of technologies are kind of what converge right now. And those are going to be something that will have an impact. If you are thinking about architecture and this kind of aspect of how computation has an impact on architecture, I think it's going to have an impact if we as architects, we change the way that we operate. Yeah. And if we don't think about us as, I'm a designer, I'm an architect, and I'm going to do a project, and then the client is going to be happy, then probably then it's not really going to serve its purpose. Because if you are thinking about it, every single architectural object or element is going to be soon associated with data broadcasting technology. That in combination, those are sensors, yeah. But that in combination with 5G, that is going to be like this kind of immense, like Wild West, like of data, yeah. And if we as architects, we don't create the connection in a way between, okay, is this kind of computation necessary for the user? Is the user actually finding in a way this meaningful, yeah? Or is just we as architects that we just like computation and we just propose those kind of designs. But when you have data, now you can have a feedback in a way. But that kind of feedback will mean a completely different kind of type of architect. It's not anymore this kind of architect where I'm telling you exactly how to design certain things and you're the client and you're just paying for it. It's a sort of architect that looks at data, analyzes data based on customers in a way, or based on preferences. You start to fine tune in a way, the way that you are going to design. So I'm not talking here about like getting stuck into this kind of status quo in a way where we are just like creating boring buildings because the customer wants that. I'm just saying that, you know, there are certain things that we are architects, I think we left behind in terms of this kind of relation with what people actually want, yeah. And probably that kind of idea is going to help a lot, yeah, once we have this kind of loops in the process, yeah. And big data and all these kind of technologies, they are going to help us. And AI, of course, thrives on that kind of technology, like big data and stuff, you know.
Well, Daniel, I have to say here that we do rarely disagree, but here I disagree with you.
Okay.
I think that the idea to basically say, okay, we can solve everything with a box, which is kind of is true. Yeah, I mean, you can solve everything with a box if you want to. It can be housing, it can be a theater, it can be a distribution center, a data mine. It doesn't matter. It can always be a box. Yeah, and trying to divorce basically architectural meaning from program and matter. Yeah. Reduces our role to experienced designers, yeah, and I'm a little bit concerned to do that because I still think, and maybe I want to say here, I would like to coin the term GOFA, good old-fashioned architecture, yeah, that sometimes it's necessary to prove the value of architecture by having a built environment that has a certain cultural expression. And I don't think that a box is always a solution for that problem. There is and what I think we're doing, or I hope at least that what we're doing with our Eastern interest in big data is to find the right cultural expression for a contemporary time. I'm not even talking about the future. I'm talking about now. Yeah. And I don't think that we as architects have found it yet. In my opinion, architecture is being repeating their own history now again. It's doing the same problem they had in the 19th century. They're repeating itself over and over again, right? I see also things like parametricism very, very critically because it's basically the repetition of a recipe over and over again, yeah? And I'm concerned about it because I think there are tools out there, and big data, neural networks are some of those tools that allow us to mine cultural production of humanity, to envision a new possibility for architecture. And that vision, by the way, is not done by a machine. That vision is provided by us humans responding to what the machine is giving us, yeah? And I think it's an important conversation that has to be done. And I don't think it's a style, by the way. I wouldn't even describe it as a style, yeah? Some people might describe it as a style, but I think that the whole involvement of big data and artificial intelligence and neural networks is so deeply embedded in our everyday life that it has become part of human culture, even without us knowing about it, I think. Yeah. But now it's really our task as designers, architects, and artists to really find how does this express in matter, in material artifacts, in material culture. That's why it's called material culture. It's because we leave things behind as humans that express our contemporary time at the time it was done. So I do not agree with the idea that we should maybe just become, you know, experienced designers. Yeah, that's a little bit. I think there are maybe even people out there who are better equipped than architects to do that. But I might be wrong on that too.
Yeah, so I hear for sure when we talk about AI, I know that these are the examples that we have out there. Yeah? Like we always have this kind of ideas thrown in our face. We used AI, and then you look at the result, it's a box. Yeah, and for sure, I'm against that kind of thing. And I think there we have a lack of really understanding all the layers and all the complexity of an architecture project. Yeah, because if you reduce everything, it's just function and it's just price per square meters and so on. For sure, you end up with boxes. Yeah, but if you get to a stage where actually you start to discover insights that normally you're not going to be able to discover as a traditional architect in a way, I think that's something that can improve. Actually, can make things better. And this is what I'm thinking about, this kind of feedback. We always, as architects, we always design a building. We compete in a competition. We win the competition, let's say, this year, and then just in 5 years, probably the project starts, and then only in 5 years the project is finished. Yeah, it's completed. Yeah, and then which is the feedback loop that we get from that process? Yeah, it's taking us 10 years to get a feedback loop about how the space is used, is it really well organized or not, and so on. Yeah. So for me, it's then, you know, if I have this kind of technologies like sensors, and if every single architectural element is going to be associated with this kind of technology, then suddenly I can start to discover insights that probably as an architect, I never thought of those insights. Yeah. And then the question for sure, I mean, personally, I'll love to believe that we are not going to end up with boxes. When you start to have this kind of like super granular data about the way that the space is used, our assumptions that how the space is used, and how our assumptions as architects, that when we design, we make a few assumptions, the space is going to be used this way, when in fact it's used completely differently by people, yeah, after the building is built. So in that sense, I'm looking at this as that kind of loop, not a loop that is going to optimize things, a loop that is going to give us insights to actually design better. Yeah.
I'm with Daniel here too. So I'm sorry, but I agree.
Finally, we agree on something.
yeah. So if we're looking for a sort of a medium for expression of the now, of the contemporary sort of moment, is architecture really the venue for that, the vehicle for that? You say, I mean, you use the word, you know, experience design as I have to speak up for experienced designers. As a director of a program that includes people who are coming from experience design and wish to continue in that vein, I've gained a new appreciation for that as a potential discipline. Other disciplines that are closer to experience design are faster, right? As Daniel said, and perhaps better suited to address the very serious questions raised by computation that you've mentioned. I feel like in many ways, the architects we remain sort of enraptured to the birth of the modern movement as this sort of singular time, but that happened, right? The modern movement happened in the context of the thing that came before. And in the 19th century, buildings were indeed an appropriate medium to express the zeitgeist, right? That things moved slower, and buildings were kind of moved more at the pace that culture moved. And so buildings were an appropriate sort of medium to express cultural values, let's say. But building styles are no longer an appropriate media for this purpose. They are, the shape of my building is no longer an appropriate media for the expression of the contemporary moment. We have Instagram, and it's better at that, right? So why would we ask buildings to perform in this way? So I would argue that typologies of buildings matters less in the 20th century than typologies of practice. And I think that as architects, we have a very rich culture of practice. We have a variety of types of practice, of ways of engaging with culture and data and engineering, right? I think we have a rich culture of participating in the material world, producing material culture. And I think that we're ill-suited by framing that and limiting that only to the production of buildings. We should become experienced designers, and we should do so gleefully.
But it's interesting when you say the building, what demand the building is a cultural expression. Then I mean, you can do the same arguments as modernists did, then as against the style, or against the kind of the expression as a style. Of course, like music or anything that expresses is much quicker. And modernists had a solution that they actually did stage sets, that they stage in a way expressions. The Miesian box. So this the idea of a box is actually that you have a stage. I mean, today, like a stage is a platform. We know, like the media which you post on Instagram or TikTok, fundamentally is different in its whole plurality, how it's in a way expressed on those platforms. Like with, I don't know how many users, like in a way contribute to those platforms. And for me, it's interesting how that in a way computes architecture, how you can have a material manifestation of that. And here's the same, and with the sensors also, like see also like there's a much more dynamic form of expression, or like already like a plural notion of expression. When you say like I don't know, everyone knows what the vibe, or like maybe a vibe or something, like what TikTok is. Everyone knows like how a certain form of medium today on a platform in a way expresses. But each one can, I don't know, like from each political or whatever spectrum you can unfold it. So in this sense, also when you say, this was from Daniel, when you say like the idea of sensors, so that of course, like a building is highly interconnected. But then it's already interesting actually, who's then the user or who's then the client. When you take your Wi-Fi signals, so we know we can 3D scan the Wi-Fi signals only in a way your space. So who owns actually, who participates in this data? It's me who owns that phone, but it's also in a way everyone who I in a way accept or give the permission to gather or collect this data also. So you see like the idea, who's actually using that space, for what purpose that space is used, who's then the owner and so on, gets in the same way completely like multiplied or multifaceted in that way. So that and that's then also the purpose of architecture, for giving them, having a multifaceted kind of capacity for this expressing those kind of purposes and ownerships or whatever that then is.
I think if we don't choose to address these questions, like also Daniel, you're raising these questions: who owns this data and all the elements in that you have in a building that are going to be associated with this kind of technology? Who owns that data, or is the user, or who exactly? And if you're thinking, if you're looking already, I think in UK they already have something called COBE or something like that, where they have to an architect has to provide a BIM model, yeah, and they have to provide in a way. Wait a second. Sorry, I'm missing I'm messing things in my head right now. No, it was something like, you know, the architect has to, or a certain fee is retained from the architect until post-occupancy of the building. And only then, in a way, after 1 year, if the building is really performing the way that the architect is claiming that it's performing, only then, in a way, you get that fee, you know, yeah? So for me, it's like, it's already happening. So do we allow developers to dictate the game? Or are we as architects going to say, okay, that's the way that data is going to be used in architecture, yeah? Because otherwise that's what's going to happen, yeah? It's going to be like, as an architect, I'm going to have a fee retained from already like super small fee that I have as an architect. And 1 year, I'm not going to get those money only because my building has to prove that it's going to be really used the way that I'm claiming, yeah? So then for me, it's like, okay, do we get ahead of curve here and we try to be the ones that try to formulate exactly how we use data and how exactly will this, in a way, help us to project in the future and really back our claims with data, or are we allowing like developers and politicians in the end to dictate this game? Yeah, because if that's happening, then I mean, pretty much what exactly we are doing then as architects. Yeah,
I'm fully on board. I love the discussion of like professional jurisdiction and what we claim ownership over as architects, and I want to turn us into experienced designers and product designers and building operations managers. I want all of that territory because I think we would do it better. But I think Matias wants us to talk about building types. So I wonder if there's a way of returning it to that narrow topic. And so
I don't think it was exactly about talking about types. It was rather understanding that our built environment is changing through the application of big data, and that maybe I expressed it through type, but basically what I'm meaning is understanding where is our role as architects within a context of data-driven design methodologies that include AI methods. Yeah, I think that's more what I'm asking for here. And you can make the argument for something that is immaterial, as you were saying, for example, with user experience design and things like that. But there might be also material fallout for what we're doing here. And I also want to emphasize that I'm completely here with Daniel also on the, and I say this to everyone who wants to hear it or doesn't want to hear it. If we don't engage as architects in this conversation about the use of neural networks, AI, and data in architecture design, somebody else will do it for us. And this is going to be developers and other people. Yeah. And then we will not be part of this conversation, which is not the most healthy thing for the development of architecture, in my opinion. So this is the frame of conversation that I'm trying to paint here. Like yeah, go ahead.
I would go even a bit further and will tell them, if you're not on the forefront, they will never ask us.
Exactly.
Because we're just costing them money, you know. So it's something they think, and that's why they I hear them already. You know, guys, that's why we developed AI in the first place, to get rid of this extra cost of design, right? I mean, we have to speed up, be on top of them, you know. And in the moment, this is not happening.
And that, yeah, one application of automation in general in design is the replacing the replacing of the architect. And I don't think that that's actually feasible, but there are people that are working on it. There are folks that are working on that kind of thing. I heard rumor of a company that does office fit out and furniture design and production, asking to get a hold of a large architectural firm's previous body of work so they can train a neural network on furniture arrangements, which I'm pretty sure that large architectural firm firmly said no. But that's the kind of thing which is not in the near future anymore. It's in the present.
Absolutely. I mean, look, these companies, you know how it is. Scraping data, for example, has become a thing where people don't even ask about who owns that data anymore. It's just being done. No one is asking, they're just doing it. Yeah. And there's, you know, just recently I read this, the Atlas of AI, and where these examples are really well documented, that scraping has been, like the whole development of how it turned from collecting data scientifically with labeling and with addressing the ownership and really making sure that it's everything correct, to completely Wild West actions in terms of data scraping, it took a couple of decades, but that's where we are now. And if you think about this, I mean, I'm not going to exempt myself from that, because we have used scraping to collect Baroque plans or, you know, images and so on. Yeah, it's just too seductive to do it, not to do it. Yeah. So the question here is also going to be, I mean, I don't think that we're going to go far with claiming, wait, this is my copyright here, because it's just so widespread right now that it's almost impossible to follow anymore. Yeah. But the main thing is also, what do we architects do with this knowledge? And I would like to add, by the way, that I can imagine also people saying that we are working on getting rid of architects because we're working in this area of AI. Yeah. Yes. Because we're collecting data sets of architecture and really working on the processes. Yeah. But it is like with every new development in architecture, if some people will make an advantage out of it and use it for the benefit of architectures, and some will not. And this has been with a lot of techniques in architecture. So it's just in us, I think, we have maybe this sort of a little bit of a self-destructive grain in ourselves as architects. Maybe that's the artist in us, I don't know. But it's going to be curious to see how it benefits architecture. I'm totally for that. It will be beneficial for architecture if you use it right.
And Kyle, I think probably the problem would also be that even if you're pro artists that are experienced designers, that's the same problem for them as well, right? Because you can also put that into an AI and then have, you know, you don't need the experienced designer anymore because it's done with an AI. So.
Or the expectation will be that in the end, the expectation will be in the end that we have AIs that are perfect at automating design, yeah. But then you need designers to get out of that kind of interpolation and to really push in a way the things forward, yeah. One thing that I also wanted to point out is going back to this kind of discussion of spaces and technology and so on, like how the spaces are defined. And for me, I mean, AI, it's still hard for me to really pinpoint and to say, okay, it's really going to affect spaces directly. But I still see other technologies that have a bigger impact on spaces than AI. Yeah. For example, we all know that VR, for example, is really going to revolutionize the way that we go to theaters or public spaces and so on. Yeah. And all these kind of virtual, you know, experiences is going to really like tone down all these kind of public spaces. So I'm coming from the perspective where I know Prix, he's always for spaces, yeah. And for sure, personally, I also want that, yeah. But in the same time, I cannot be blind to where the world is moving, yeah. And right now, for example, there is a strong incentive there, yeah, because also this COVID, let's say, also this COVID period that we are in, suddenly remote work, it's something that everyone accepts, yeah. So then suddenly it's not anymore about the question of I have to be in the city center, and then because I don't have to be in the city center doesn't have to have all these like spaces, public spaces, theater, cinema, and so on, because all those like activities, those spaces are replaced by virtual things, yeah. And I will see those kind of spaces are going to become something very exclusive, that I'm just going once a year, like something when there is a big event. But beside that, it's going to be, you know, I just have my own VR, so I can explore space in that way, yeah. So that will have a bigger impact, for example, in architecture and types of spaces than AI, I think, will have. AI mostly will have this kind of impact probably when it comes to performance, to we as designers being able to really understand in a way the challenges, the problems that the space has, and maybe start to have better informed decisions in a way when we design something. But beside that, I think there are other technologies that are more disruptive when it comes to spaces than AI. So I'm saying these things because
I still feel the opposite way, because I've been in the suburbs now for a year, And for me, it's the total opposite. I know now for sure, you know, I can't really say I always knew, but now it's really, I need cities, yeah. I need cities, and I need to see people, and I need to hear them. I need to feel them, and I need to smell them. Even if it's stench, I love it. And even if it's noisy, I want to hear the noise. Sorry.
So that's the European.
For me, I cannot live in isolation in an AI chamber and be totally happy. Sorry.
Yeah, so for me, that's the distinction that I'm making. Like as an architect, for sure, that's the view that I have myself too. Yeah. So I love to go to a city and really like enjoy, in a way, architecture and the feeling of the space and so on. But for me, it's like when I start to talk with average people, those are meaningless for them. Yeah. Many people, I find it like meaningless. So it's just that I'm trying to understand in a way that it's me as an architect that I have a very wrong, in a way, view of the world, or is really the other way around, that the world has a very wrong view of how the space has to be used, you know. But my feeling is that that train, it's already gone. Yeah, like people are already pushing, and also technology is pushing that kind of direction. So then as an architect, what can I do? Can I be this kind of renegade and really like just try to continue point out that white space is it's better than virtual space? Or how exactly we have to approach that, you know?
Daniel, it's not about either or. I think it's going to be both, like it has been always. You know, it's not final. It's just, I mean, only the really stupid media like CDs are getting out of the game, hopefully. But other, you know, you're still reading books, and sometimes I mean, I'm totally pro Kindle. You know, for example, Matias not. So Matias is schlepping all his books and whatever, just thousands of kilograms. And
yeah, I think this is something that we always, as a society, I think we always play this kind of like balance.
No,
in a way.
we really need some cool spaces where we can play. You know, when we are teenagers and we can there secretly. So until then, we can happily start our conversations and starting how we meet in a virtual environment. But at some point, you have to actually meet the person, right?
I think
also always... when you go to the dentist, I mean, it's possible that you have a robot then at your home that is cleaning up, but all of these appliances cost things, you know. I don't think that everyone of us will have a totally trained dentist, psychiatrist, and whatever as a tool, you know, at home. But we will help them, you know. But some of them will be probably too expensive to have each of us individually own one. So I think there is a need for spaces.
I think Daniel has his hand up. I'm so sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Daniel,
go ahead.
I'll just say, in growing up in suburban America, this place that we meet is called the mall, and it's the original virtual reality. I'll leave it to Daniel.
Well, we have a lot of those now. They're all waiting to be like Cinderella or or like
Snow White.
Snow White, yeah.
I'm just going to say thank you very much to everyone for joining our conversation today. It was great to have you. I look forward to our panel discussion and symposium in November in Venice in real life, hopefully. So we can all meet there and, you know, collectively talk about this without any Zoom delays and bad Wi-Fi's, but really in person. And yeah, I'm looking forward to this. Thank you everyone for joining us today. It was a great conversation, and thanks again to everyone. Good night.
Thank you so much. Bye, Kyle. Bye, Daniel.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.